in the advertisement. They never show anybody that just got off a treadmill, that just got off of a heavy workout, that's just all sweaty and all tired and just barely able to walk. They show people very refreshed, very happy, in very nice workout outfits. I've joined health clubs before, gone, paid my due, gone in and begin to work out, only to find out that it's work. I think that's why they call it a workout. You work, and it is hard. And pretty soon you convince yourself that it might be easier to just buy a treadmill. If I just had something at home, I would work out more. But the truth is, the health club, it turns out that my biggest workout was having a card in my pocket and carrying that extra weight, because I just didn't go enough. And then the treadmill was a great idea, but it turned into another clothes rack. Anybody have a clothes rack at home like that? I get more exercise moving the stuff off of the treadmill than I actually get from doing it. But there is a workout. There's a cost when you join a health club. The same thing happened. Just up the hill, if you didn't know, there's a high school called Stevens. And I graduated from Stevens, and I was a wrestler at Stevens. I wrestled 3 years on the varsity squad. And it was amazing. Every year, right around a little bit before Thanksgiving, workouts would begin, right after football, really. Workouts would begin. And that first day, you would go out, and you'd go up into the mat. We used to meet in the gym where one of the slide outs were for the bleachers. Now they have a beautiful workout facility. And we would be up there, and then it would be like shoulder to shoulder people. I'd go like, wow, we're going to have an awesome team this year, because look at all these people. And then Coach Long would say, okay, jump on the track and just start running. And we would run until you would not feel well. And you would run some more after that. And what would happen, I would notice we were running around the track, and pretty soon you'd see one guy run down the stairs into the locker room and out the building. I mean, he was gone. He didn't even make it the first practice. But what would happen, about 3 weeks into it, we would be down to 36 people. Every year the same thing happened. Because people didn't realize it's not just about being on a wrestling team. There's a cost to be a part of this team. Sometimes we don't realize the payoff. I was fortunate. Dad got me into wrestling when I was very young. So even at a young age, I got to stand on that. You know, they have that like the fourth, third, second, first place. I got to stand up here as a little, kindergartner, first grader, and get that medal and go like, wow, this is cool. I like this feeling. So you understood the cost and the payoff. But sometimes I think in our walk with Christ, we don't understand that there's cost involved. We've been in this series called Follow, and here's the deal. If you haven't been here, Jesus calls sinners to follow him. He calls people who are far away from him to say, come on, get up. He called Matthew a tax collector. We talked about that. Matthew wasn't just a sinner. He was a tax collector. They had their own category. You might have some people like that in your life, in our culture today. Oh, there are sinners, and then you need to realize Jesus calls whoever those people you think are unsavable, untouchable, unclean. You put them into their own category. Jesus loves them, and Jesus would be walking up to them this week and saying, follow me. He also, maybe you're here today and you're going like, you know what, I'm not really in any of this because I got too many questions. I got doubts about whether Jesus is really who he said he is. The other thing is he called sinners, he called doubters too. One of his inner 12 had the nickname Doubting. Doubting Thomas. He called him. And it's okay to have questions. I want to let you know, Westgate Community Church is a safe place to ask, what if? What about this? The young adult group meeting in the back. Kurt, I know you have that heart to just say, I want people who, I don't have all the answers with them, but if they got questions, this is a safe place to say, what about this? What about that? I don't get this. How does that apply to our world today? A safe place to ask what is. We talked about what Christians should wear. If you missed that, I can tell some of you missed it today just by looking out in the audience. No, that's not true. It's not about a tie. It's not about a suit. It's putting on compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience. Jesus said, clothe yourself. Jesus didn't. Paul talked about this, a teaching that Jesus had. Paul took it and amplified it a little bit. And he said, clothe yourself with compassion, with kindness, with humility, gentleness, and patience. Follow me. It almost makes it sound like for Matthew, it's just, Matthew, you tax collector, you sinner, get up, follow me. And that's all he had to do. But today we're going to kind of talk a little bit more about the cost of following Jesus. This is a place that we can kind of lose some people. What do you mean? There's a cost? There's something that I have to invest in this? And this is where even theologians, even people go like, no, all you have to do is accept, and God's grace moves in, and all your sins are forgiven. And here's the deal. That is true. Salvation, what Jesus did on the cross, what he did when he died on the cross, that communion, the blood that he spilled, that our sins could be taken away, that's free. No cost. Because if there was, we couldn't have paid it. Jesus paid it all. All to him I owe. Jesus did it. And so that's free. I can't buy it. I can't earn it. I don't deserve it. I never have. I never will. And the truth is, if you're following Jesus, the closer you get to him, the more you realize your broken condition. The closer you get and the more you understand who he is, even at this early stage, you're going like, oh, I'm not such a bad person. I look back at Joel 30 years ago, and I go, how did you even tolerate me, God? And now I look at me now, and I go, God, I'm still broken apart from you. So that's a free gift. Salvation is free. The relationship that starts and is birthed out of salvation, this following Jesus, this being a disciple of Jesus, will cost you something. It will cost you something. We're going to look today, and Jesus is talking about death on the cross and crucifixion and all of this kind of stuff. And I have some good news for you today. Most of you, well, I think I can probably say all of you, none of you, maybe that's a better way to say it, will probably have to pick up a cross in your lifetime and cross up to Dinosaur Hill and die on a cross. I'm not a prophet, but that's probably not going to happen. Now, in the world we live in, a lot can go on in the next few years. I don't see that happening to anybody in this room. But there is a cost. There is something that is going to cost each one of us. Let's take a look. If you have your Bibles, just open up with me to Mark chapter 8. You can open your Bibles. You can turn on your electronic device. If you have a device, we have a Westgate is just a website, a Wi-Fi that you can go to, and just go to Hills, Hills, no caps, 144, and you can get on there, and you don't have to use your data. We'll save you your data while you're here. But let's just look at this. Mark is talking about this passage. Who do people say that I am? You know what? We live in a day that it's important for us to have an ear to, in our culture, who people say Jesus is. And so that's going to be one part that we look at. And Jesus asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? They replied, some say you're John the Baptist. John the Baptist was beheaded and dead, and some people thought that this was a reincarnation or a rebirth of John the Baptist, and that was Jesus. He would just come back to live stronger and better than others. Others say Elijah. Others say you're one of the prophets. But who do you... But what about you, he said in chapter 29. What about you, he asked. Who do you say that I am? It's one thing to know what people in our culture think or who they think Jesus is. And today, it's not a whole lot different than then. I don't know what you've heard when you've talked to people, but people will say like, oh man, I think Jesus is a good teacher. I think Jesus is a prophet. He was a prophet, a mighty man of God. Some people will say, I think he was a lunatic. I think he's a liar. I think he's a joke. I think he's something that was just made up, that he wasn't even real. But most people in our culture, and especially in the Dakotas, the Midwest, would say, oh, if they don't believe he's the Son of God, the Messiah, the one true way to God, they would say, I think he's a prophet. I think he's a good teacher. Oh, I think he had some great writings. It's important to know what our culture and what our time is saying, but it's even more important, just like in this time, Jesus said, who do you say that I am? It's important that you know who you think Jesus is, because it's going to determine how you connect and how you follow him. If you're a follower and you come to that conclusion that I think he's just a good teacher, it's going to change the way you follow. If you think he is the Messiah, that he was and is and always will be, that he had no beginning and he has no end, that he was God that got flesh and died on a cross and then rose from the dead, you're going to follow him differently. One of the things that is really important is Jesus made it very clear. He didn't leave any middle ground for who he is. People who say, oh, he's a good teacher, they don't really know what he said about himself, obviously. Because Jesus said point blank, I am the way. Not a way, not an idea, not a concept. He said, I am the way, the truth, the life. I am the only way to God the Father. Nobody but through me. So he's either who he says he is or he's a lunatic. He's either who he says he is or we should throw the book away and not even get close to him. Because the good man, the prophet, you can't be a prophet and make those kind of statements. That would make you a liar. That would make you a lunatic. Jesus asked this question, who do you say that I am? Verse 30, Peter answered, you are the Messiah. That was the end of 29, excuse me. You are the Messiah. Jesus warned them not to tell anybody about him. Matthew, the portion in Matthew that has the same thing, Jesus says, oh my goodness, that's amazing. You didn't figure that out on your own. That was given to you by my Father. That was prophetically kind of implanted into you. That was downloaded from God to you. And so that's pretty amazing, but he still said, don't tell anybody. He then began to teach them, the Son of Man must suffer many things. He must be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and after 3 days he'll rise again. He spoke plainly about this. I love the fact that Mark says he spoke plainly. He didn't allude to this. He didn't kind of hint about this. He didn't say this might happen and there could be some tough times coming. It says he spoke very plainly and clearly that I'm going to suffer, I'm going to be rejected, and I am going to be killed. Then Peter took him aside. I would have loved to have been there for this. The God, the one that he just said, you're the Messiah, you're the big guy, you're the one that we've been looking for. Jesus says all this. Peter comes up and he takes him aside and he rebukes him. Peter pulls him aside and begins to say, that will never happen. Jesus, that's not going to happen to you. Because, and this is Peter really, I think, in the back of Peter's mind, because he's going like, because if that happens to you, that means it's going to happen to me. If you're going to go through suffering, we're going to go through suffering. Because right now, I don't see that happening. Because right now, we talked about this in weeks past, we're rock stars. We come into a town, and the town gets excited. The town throws a party. The town comes out to see us. Well, they come out to see you, but I'm with you. I'm one of you. So I get the overflow of all of their affection and all of their life because I got an inroad with you. So if they can't get to you, they come to me. And I feel pretty special. So this suffering talk, it needs to stop. This persecution talk, Jesus, I don't want to hear anymore. That's kind of the rebuke that was coming. This dying on the cross business is not for me. Do you remember? I gave up my business to follow you. Jesus, I've sacrificed a lot to be a part of this group. So this whole talk about sacrifice or suffering, rejection, murder, killing you, I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want to hear that anymore. Verse 33, but when Jesus turned and looked at the disciples, so this, sometimes I think Peter gets the blame for this, but I think it's the whole group is probably in the background is they're kind of hearing this and they're going like, I'm with Peter. I agree with Peter. Stop it. Knock it off. It's done. We don't want anything to do with it. We like the popularity thing going on here. But he looked at them and he rebuked Peter. And he says, "Get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the concerns of God." You don't have a God picture about what's going on. You're not seeing God's big plan, but merely human concerns. You're only seeing how this impacts you. You only see how this is going on from your perspective. I got a different perspective, and so that's what's going on. What I find interesting here is Peter goes from prophetic to Satan in a matter of a few minutes. He goes from, "You are amazing, Peter, that you came up with this," to "Get behind me, Satan." He goes from prophetic to pathetic in a matter of a moment. It's just that quick. It's over. Wait a minute. You were just patting me on the back, and that's why I stood up, because I think, have you ever had a prophetic word? God spoke something into you, and you knew it was God. You knew it was God, and you spoke it, and then you thought, like, well, now that I got that out, I got a couple other things I'd like people to know. And you add on your own PS. I think that's what Peter was doing here. You go like, "Oh, yeah. You want to hear a little bit more of my prophetic thoughts?" And they really did turn out to be pretty pathetic thoughts. Why does Jesus say this to Peter and his disciples? That's a big question. That's where I want to spend a lot of time today. We're going to have a lot more scripture to look at. But you think about this. Peter was just saying, "I don't want you to die. I don't want to die." Anybody here want to die? Pretty human thought. Pretty human emotion. I don't want to die. I would probably tell Jesus, "Hey, can we talk about something else? Let's talk about that last time we went in. That was kicking. That was fun. People came out. There were some people healed. There were some people delivered. That demonic, oh boy, that was cool. Let's talk more about that kind of stuff." And he said, why does Jesus say so quickly, "Get behind me, Satan"? Jesus was telling them about he was going to die. He was going to be on the cross. He was going to suffer. And he was telling them that. And they realized that they were a part of that. So why would Jesus, right when he say it, cut him off? And this is what I really believe it is. Jesus is God in flesh on this planet. He knew what he was supposed to do, but he was fully God, fully man. And for me, that's hard to get my head around. You're either one or the other. But he was fully God, sinless, but he was a man. It says he was tempted in every way just like you and I are tempted. He was tired just like you and I get tired. I'm sure he was frustrated with his disciples just like we get frustrated with people who are close to us. So why did he not have compassion and go, "Oh, let me explain this"? I think it's because Jesus knew the power of entertaining a thought like that. He knew what could happen not only for his disciples, but for him. He knew that that wasn't what he came here for. He knew his plan and his purpose was to die on a cross someday. But you know what? He was fully man. And if he can entertain that thought, go like, "You know what? Maybe there is a better way. Maybe this plan that God had isn't the only way." And you start entertaining a thought like that, you start going like, "Ooh, maybe there is a plan B." Jesus knew that God's plan, God's ways, God's purpose was what he was about. And he didn't want to have anything else in his mind, anything else to consume him. Jesus chose to listen to the Father rather than to listen to man. God chose to listen to the Father rather than to listen to man. He knew that friends, just like he knows for us, friends can be the best thing that happened to you, and they could be the worst thing that happened to you. I've had friends in my life that just rubbing up alongside of them and being close to them makes me want to be a better follower of Christ. I've been around other people, and I just kind of there, and I love them, and we're together, and I find myself being challenged to mediocrity. I've told you about this. I had a good friend in high school, and we would go to camps together, and I don't understand why this happened, but every time I had a God experience, he didn't. We would come back, we were buddies, and he would, I was up here going like, "God, this is great," and he was more than happy to be down here and just pull me right down to where he was. The next year, it would happen to him, and something didn't happen to me, and I did my best job to pull him down to my level. I've had other people in my life. I remember, like it was yesterday, there was a park, and I was doing youth ministry stuff, and before I was a youth pastor, First Assembly didn't have a youth pastor at that time, and so I was doing some youth stuff, and I sat down on a bench with a teenager, and that young man had a conversation with me that marked me to this day, challenging me to holiness and purity. Not me as the youth pastor and him as the student, but him as the student. And it just, you know what? You're going to have people that challenge you that are new Christians, people who have been Christian as long as you, and people who are way beyond where you are. But you're going to have people that cause you to be compromised in all of those positions too. And Jesus realized that. He understood the power of a thought and of a friend. Friends empathize, sympathize, and have compassion with what you're going through. So you know what? I talked with Rick this week, and I said, Rick, I can tell you almost any story in my life and tell it to you in a way that you would say like, oh man, I sympathize with you. You know what? You're probably right in feeling that way. And because we're friends, we want to help people. Who wants to make their friends feel bad? You know, you want to make your friends feel good. And sometimes we compromise our spirituality and our relationship with God to make our friends feel like, oh, you're okay. Because I feel the same way about somebody else, and I want to feel good about me. So if we can be there together, we must be okay, because where there's two of us agreeing, there's God. Well, that's probably a stretch on that one, you know. Where two or three agree on anything. No. But Jesus doesn't even want to entertain this kind of an idea. He doesn't want to have it even be in his brains. In his brain. If I listen, this might be worth writing down. Maybe not. You can decide after you hear it. If we listen to man's excuses, their reasoning, we will never live in God's perfect plan for our life. If we listen to man's excuses, or even man's rationales, their reasonings, rather than God's perfect plan, we will never live in God's perfect plan. I can always come up with a reason why not. Oh, I don't need to do that. You ever had those moments, those thoughts, and you knew it was God? And you just say, if I just give myself 5 minutes, this will pass. It's kind of like in the morning before you meet the restroom the first time. If I just wait a while, this will pass. No, it's not. But sometimes if I just wait long enough, and Jesus knew, I don't want it to even bounce around in my brain. I don't want it here. He said, get behind me, Satan. Jesus knew that this moment in Luke 22:42 was going to come when he was in the garden. He said, Father, if there's any way for this cup to pass. Remember when Peter was talking about this and he said this wasn't a good idea. See, if he would have entertained that thought, it might have even took this prayer to a whole nother level. But Jesus said, not my will, not what I want, not what I think is important, but Father, what you think is important. What you have planned for me is what I want. If you come to Jesus, if you follow Jesus, if you're on this path with him, if you've answered this call and you say, like, I'm a sinner, I'm following, but I got doubts, but I'm following. You know what? I'm even putting on that clothes, but that compassion part of the clothes keeps falling off. I have trouble with that patience one. I'm okay until I get behind the steering wheel. And then the patience, I roll down the window, it just flies right out. But I'm clothing myself, and you're there. You know what? If you're on this path, if you're following Jesus, you're going to come to a fork in the road. There's going to come a time when you're walking along, and there's going to be two choices laid out before you. God's way or your way. It's just going to happen. And that's when we talk about this cost, you might not end up on the cross, and you might not end up being crucified, and you might not end up being beheaded somewhere, but you're going to have this moment where you're following, you're going along, and there's going to be a fork in the road. And you're going to have to make a decision. Do I follow God? listen to my friends? Do I listen to the crowd? These fork in the roads are going to happen for you and to you at work. They're going to happen in relationships. You're going to be having friendships, and you're going to have friends that are going to call you and pull you to do something, and you go, no, I don't think that's what God has for me. It's going to be in your time. Maybe you're alone at home, and you go to this little device. It's not very big. In fact, I have them all over the place. It might be one of these, or an iPad, or a computer, and you're going to come to a fork in the road. You're going to go, do I click on that or do I not? Do I spend time on that website looking and meditating on those kind of images and thoughts, or do I not? You're going to come to a fork in the road. And it's going to cost you making a decision one way or the other. It's going to happen. You don't even need these devices. It's going to happen just in your thought life. What you meditate on, what you dream about, what you want to do with your life. It will happen. However, you can listen to people tell you what and why that's okay and why it's not a big deal. And if you do, you're going to come into that fork in the road. And here's the deal. I believe this with everything in me. But this makes it hard because I've taken the wrong path before. But I believe with everything in me, if you're following Jesus, if you're listening to Jesus, even though you have doubts, even though you have questions, but you're following, that fork in the road comes, that initial thought is you know which way is right and which way is not. You do. I think otherwise God would be a tricky God and go, pick a road, any road, see which one's good or bad. And then you get down the road a while and you go, whoop, wrong road. You know. I don't think that's how God works. I think it's very clear. But in my mind and in my friendships, I convince myself that this isn't such a bad road. I can talk myself into, and that's why Jesus shut Peter down right away, because he goes, I don't even want to have that be an option. This is my only option. This is the right road. And so I just really believe that you know which way is right and which way is wrong. If you follow Jesus and you come to the fork in the road, I think at first your reflex, again, this gets tricky because reflex is when somebody cuts you off in the middle of the road, and your reflex is, that's just kind of gut. But right after that happens, most of us know, oh man, that's not how I want to respond. But he could have hurt my car. My kid's in the back seat. That could have really hurt. See, I have a right to be mad at that idiot driver. And yet, no, just relax. You know which way is right, and you know which way is wrong. Again, in these forks in the road, they're going to come all kinds of different places in our relationship, at work, on our computer, in our mind, what we watch, how much of it I watch. Oh, I'm just going to watch a little. It won't be that bad. We talk ourselves into those kind of things. Oh, that show's not really bad. It's only a little bit R. They only do a little bit. I've seen worse before, so it can't be that bad. We have to decide, if I follow Jesus, I really do believe you'll know what's right and wrong. And that comes from Under the Hood series that we did a couple years ago. Anybody remember Under the Hood? Those disciplines that we need to have in our lives. If you're praying, if you're fasting, if you're studying, you're reading, meditating, solitude, silence, you have confession, you go to people and you go like, man, I blew it, I need your help. If you're a worshiper, you come in here, some of you, and I know you don't get what happens at the beginning. You go, I don't get that. Some of that is our souls, our inner being just need to figure out a way to express how much we love God and how much we do it. And I dare you. I double dog dare you to just enter in a little bit when we worship. You don't need to jump up and down. And you might not be a whooper like me. Every now and then it just comes up and you got to go, woo! You might not be like Joe and just jump around. But you know what? Maybe do this. Just exercise a little. No, don't do. You got to do that. Or you get really weird. Do something. Enter in. You go like, Joel, I'm not that kind of person. Well, maybe this is what you need to do. Is just turn around in your seat and just say, God, I'm going to take a different posture rather than the posture that I find myself in all the time. I don't get this. This is stupid. Maybe just take a different posture. And I'm not saying if you don't jump up and down, you're not doing, because I know we all worship different. We're all wired different. Worship. Enter into that place. The fork in the road. Who will I listen to? Will I listen to God or will I listen to man? And it's going to cost me something to listen to God. Minneapolis. I love church in Uptown. It was a great place. It was a great learning experience. But you know what? Because I listened to God, I stopped getting invited to house parties. I stopped getting invited to get-togethers, even church get-togethers, because they were on a different path than I was, than Lori was. Who are you going to follow? I lost my clock. No, sorry. Oh, you guys are in trouble. I'm not really all that sorry, but sit back there. Still some donut holes, I'm sure, in the back. I'm just going to wrap up real quickly with reading a big chunk of real estate here, Matthew 8:34. After all of this happened, then he called the crowd in, and not just his disciples, but he called a crowd in, other people who were there. Whoever wants to be my disciple, he wasn't just telling this to his inner circle. He was making this clear to anybody. Anybody here, you want to follow Jesus? Salvation is free. Can't buy it, can't earn it, can't deserve it. But the relationship, Jesus would say, whoever wants to be my disciple, you have to deny yourself. This isn't Joel saying, I can say this really bluntly because this is in red. You have to deny yourself. You have to take up your cross and follow me. This culture, when they heard the word take up cross, they saw death. Because they've never seen a person take up their cross, walk up the hill, and walk back down. When you pick up your cross, it was a sign of death. It's not like today, take up your cross. Ooh, nice chain and a gold cross or a silver cross or a wood cross, whatever you are, you know. You can pick your cross. No, your cross was picked for you, and it was death. So they understood that, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will... This is one of those passages that you go like, are you just trying to be tricky, God? But this is what Jesus said. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? If you want to make those choices, go like, oh, this is going to make my life easy. Oh, I'm going to save my life. Oh, I'm going to save a lot of trouble. If you're making those kind of choices, those are not the God choices. He's saying you're going to lose your life. You're going to lose your soul. You're going to lose the eternal part of who you are. But if you'll give up your will, if you'll die to self, if you'll follow what I have, if you'll do what I have laid out for you this week, this day, you'll have life and life everlasting. What good is it if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? If you're ashamed of me and my word in this adulterous, sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of you. I've debated. I think I got it. I'm going long, but I'm going to go long anyway. Francis Chan. Anybody read any Francis Chan stuff? He does an illustration. Imagine this rope goes around the world a couple times and then just shoots off into the universe and goes on forever. Really, it ends in the back room, but just imagine that with me. Francis Chan talks about, and this verse really talks about whoever wants to save their life will lose it, and whoever wants to lose their life for the gospel and for me will gain it. This rope, let's just say it represents you. Because you and I, we have a life on this planet. This body someday is going to turn into dust and die. But there's a part of us that lives on, and this represents our eternity that goes on forever. In his illustration, he says, this black part is, let's just say you live 80 years. This is your 80 years on this planet. This is your eternity. This is your soul living on forever. We get so focused on this that we forget that there's this. This verse and these choices, they're not about what happens only in this life. They're about how this life lives on and how this life is going to be continued on forever in God's presence, how we conduct ourselves right here. We do things for these first 60 years. We go, oh, I'm going to work really hard. I'm going to save really hard so I can have fun in this part of my life. I'm going to save, I'm going to save, I'm going to save, I'm going to save. I'm going to buy an RV. And I'm going to spend a lot of money on gas. So I got to save a lot of money. But I'm going to do really cool things. I'm going to be an RVer. I'm going to go and help church planners build their church for nothing because I worked really hard this part of my life. And I want to make sure that I don't have any trouble in this part of my life because I want to be comfortable and I want to have all the things I want to have and I want to be liked and I want people to like me. Instead of thinking about, wait a minute, this is going to determine how I live this. I didn't ask this question today. But Dad, you're 84 years old. How fast did it go? It went fast. I'm 54. When I was 18, I thought this thing was going to go on forever. And now I look back and I thought, wow, my brain is either really freaking out or this life is fast. I want to take my fork in the road. And two things. One, I want to surround myself with people who won't help me compromise. I want to surround myself with people who will speak in love very directly to me. I already have Lori. I don't need another one of her. But I thank God for her because she speaks the most directly into my life. Joel? And she says idiot like it's a term of endearment. You know, you're being an idiot. You know, she's never called me that. But you know what I'm saying if you're a husband when your wife says, what? Jesus is saying, deny yourself. Die to self. What good is it if you have everything? People like you. People want you around because you compromise and you make them feel good about who they are. But you lose your very soul.